Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the memory a king can never forget. Rain fell in silver sheets through the towering pines of Black Hollow Forest, turning the narrow trail into a ribbon of mud and scattered leaves. Lila Morgan pulled her thin gray coat tighter around her shoulders and lowered her head against the cold wind. The basket hanging from her arm felt almost weightless now. There was only one small piece of bread left inside, the last food she had managed to save after a long day of work that no one seemed to appreciate. At 22, Lila had grown used to being overlooked. In the Ash Creek Pack, strength earned respect, confidence attracted attention, and power commanded loyalty. Lila possessed none of those things. She was an Omega with a quiet voice, gentle hands, and a habit of helping others even when she had little for herself. Most wolves saw that as weakness. Earlier that afternoon, she had spent hours helping prepare supplies for the upcoming moon gathering. While others laughed around warm fires and shared meals, she remained in the background carrying boxes and cleaning tables. By sunset, nobody remembered to save her a seat or offer her dinner. Not that she expected them to. Expectations only led to disappointment. A sharp gust swept through the forest, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant cedar. Lila quickened her pace. Her small cabin sat nearly a mile away, tucked near the edge of pack territory where few people ever visited. She was already imagining the warmth of her fireplace when a faint sound reached her ears. She stopped. The forest grew still around her. Another sound followed. Weak, strained, almost hidden beneath the rain. A whimper. Lila turned slowly. Her heartbeat quickened. Most wolves would have ignored it. The woods were full of creatures. Nature took its course. But something in that sound tugged at her chest. She stepped off the trail and followed it deeper between the trees. Branches brushed against her sleeves. Mud soaked through her boots. The sound came again, slightly louder this time. Then she saw it. Beneath the twisted roots of a fallen oak lay a large black wolf. Rain clung to its dark fur. One of its legs appeared injured, forcing it to remain curled against the ground. Its breathing was shallow, exhausted. Yet even in its weakened state, the animal looked extraordinary. Larger than any wolf Lila had ever seen. Powerful despite its condition. Golden eyes lifted toward her through the rain. For a moment, neither moved. Fear should have told her to leave. Common sense should have warned her to run. Instead, Lila saw only a living creature struggling alone in the cold. Slowly, she knelt. "Hey there," she whispered. "You look like you've had a rough day too." The wolf watched her carefully. Its ears twitched, but it made no attempt to rise. Lila opened her basket and stared at the single piece of bread resting inside. Her stomach tightened immediately. It was all she had, the only food waiting for her tonight. Yet when she looked back into those tired golden eyes, the decision felt strangely simple. She broke the bread in half, then paused. A moment later, she smiled softly and pushed the larger piece toward the wolf. "Guess you need it more than I do." The wolf stared at the bread, then at her. Something unreadable flickered in its gaze, almost as if it understood every word. The black wolf lifted its head slightly, sniffing the damp air and tilting its ears as if measuring the trustworthiness of the small figure kneeling before it. Lila Morgan's hands shook from the cold and the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders, but she remained still, speaking in soft, rhythmic whispers that seemed to echo through the quiet forest. Her heart pounded, not from fear of the animal, but from the awareness that she had stepped beyond her ordinary life, doing something no one else had cared to do. The wolf's eyes met hers again, a slow understanding passing between them. The rain continued to fall in fine threads, soaking her hair and dampening the hem of her coat, but she did not flinch. She reached into the small basket once more, producing a few drops of water she had carefully saved in a metal flask, and held it near the wolf's mouth. Hesitation lingered, yet the animal drank cautiously, its body trembling slightly. Lila's breath fogged in the cool night air as she murmured soothing words, her fingers brushing the wolf's wet fur with delicate care, feeling the rhythm of its shallow breathing beneath her touch. In that moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath, the wind quieting and the distant cries of other creatures muted, as if acknowledging this fragile connection forming in the shadows. A distant rustle alerted her, and she instinctively turned her gaze to the thickening trees beyond the clearing, aware that pack members often patrolled near the boundaries, curious or judgmental eyes seeking to catch any misstep. Her pulse quickened, but determination set her shoulders firmly, reminding herself that the wolf's safety mattered more than the discomfort of exposure. As she guided the animal toward a small hollow near the roots of a sturdy oak, she spoke in gentle tones, instructing it to rise and follow. The wolf obeyed slowly, testing its weight on unsteady legs, and Lila adjusted her movements to match its pace, supporting it with steady hands. Each careful step created a rhythm between them, a silent dialogue of trust and care. Her mind wandered briefly to the uncertainty awaiting her back at her cabin, the empty hearth, and the long night ahead. Yet she felt a warmth spreading from her chest, a quiet triumph in offering what little she had to a life in need. The wolf stumbled slightly, and she steadied it with a soft laugh, marveling at its resilience despite the injuries it bore. The moonlight filtered through the rain-laden branches, casting a silver glow on the clearing and illuminating both of them in its gentle radiance. Time seemed to stretch, holding the forest and its inhabitants in suspended patience, watching as two unlikely companions navigated a space of trust built on kindness and the willingness to act against indifference. Lila's gaze met the wolf's once more, noticing a flicker in its golden eyes that had not been there before, a glint that suggested recognition or perhaps gratitude, and she allowed herself a small, hopeful smile, feeling that in this shared moment of care, a connection had been formed that would ripple far beyond the muddy forest floor, beyond the cold and rain, and into the unknown path that lay ahead for both of them. Lila remained beside the hollow long after the rain softened into a mist. The black wolf rested beneath the shelter of tangled roots, its breathing steadier now than it had been an hour earlier. She should have gone home. Every practical thought told her that. The forest would be darker soon, and her cabin was nearly a mile away. Yet every time she started to stand, those golden eyes found hers again, and something inside her refused to leave. The wolf no longer looked frightened. It watched her with quiet focus, almost as though it were studying her. Lila smiled awkwardly. "I know. I talk too much." The wolf blinked once. "And you are probably tired of hearing me." Another blink. A laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. The sound felt strange. It had been a long time since she had laughed when nobody else was around. Most evenings were spent alone with chores, silence, and the familiar feeling of being forgotten. But tonight felt different. The loneliness seemed smaller somehow. A distant horn echoed through the forest. Lila immediately froze. The sound carried from the direction of Ash Creek Pack. Patrol horns. Her stomach tightened. Patrols usually meant someone important was passing through nearby territory. She glanced toward the trees, then back at the wolf. That could be trouble. The animal lifted its head. The reaction was immediate. Alert. Attentive. Almost concerned. "You should stay hidden," she whispered. "Not everyone is kind." The words slipped out before she realized how sad they sounded. For a moment, memories surfaced. Faces that never looked her way. Conversations that stopped when she approached. Invitations she never received. She quickly pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the present. The wolf did not need her sadness. It needed rest. She carefully removed the wool scarf from around her neck and folded it beside the animal. "This might help keep you warm." The wolf stared at the scarf, then at her. Then something unexpected happened. It shifted closer and rested its head lightly against the fabric. Lila's eyes widened. "You actually listened." A warm feeling spread through her chest. The simple trust felt like a gift. Wind stirred through the pine branches overhead. Moonlight broke through thinning clouds and painted silver patterns across the clearing. The wolf's dark coat shimmered beneath the light, revealing subtle streaks of silver hidden beneath the black fur. Lila had never seen markings like that before. They seemed almost regal, ancient. She reached out carefully, brushing a few damp leaves away from its shoulder. The wolf remained still. Somewhere beyond the trees, the sound of approaching horses drifted through the night. Several of them. Lila immediately stood. The patrol horn sounded again, closer this time. Whoever was coming would arrive soon. "I have to go," she said softly. "If they find me out here, there will be questions." The wolf rose as well. Stronger now. Steadier. Its golden gaze locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. For one strange moment, Lila felt as though it wanted to say something. as though there were words hidden behind those watchful eyes. Then the wind shifted. The wolf turned toward the deeper forest. Moonlight flashed across its silhouette. A second later, it disappeared between the trees as silently as a shadow. Lila stood alone in the clearing, staring after it. She should have felt relieved. Instead, an unexpected ache settled in her heart. It felt like saying goodbye to someone she had only just met. And far beyond the forest, riding beneath the same moonlit sky, a powerful man with silver eyes touched a piece of wool wrapped carefully around his hand and found himself unable to forget the kindness of an Omega named Lila Morgan. The next morning arrived beneath clear skies washed clean by the storm. Golden sunlight spilled across Ash Creek Pack, illuminating cottages, training fields, and gathering halls that looked far more welcoming from a distance than they ever felt to Lila Morgan. She carried a crate of supplies across the village square, while conversations flowed around her like water moving around a stone. Nobody stopped her. Nobody asked how her evening had been. It was the same as always. Yet her thoughts were not on the village. They remained in the forest. More specifically, on a pair of golden eyes she could not seem to forget. Several times throughout the morning, she caught herself glancing toward the distant tree line. The wolf was probably gone by now, healthy enough to travel, safe somewhere beyond the borders. The realization should have comforted her. Instead, it left an unexpected emptiness behind. Around noon, excitement began spreading through the pack. Wolves hurried through the square, carrying banners and decorations. Elders whispered together. Young hunters straightened their jackets and checked their appearances. Lila frowned as she set down another crate. Something unusual was happening. She finally overheard enough conversation to understand. Royal visitors were expected before sunset. Not just nobles. The Alpha King's delegation. The announcement sent a wave of energy through the village. Everyone suddenly moved faster, smiled wider, spoke louder. The Alpha King rarely traveled openly through smaller territories. His visits were legendary. Stories followed him everywhere. Some claimed he was ruthless. Others described him as brilliant. Most agreed on one thing. Ethan Blackwood was the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories. Lila listened quietly and returned to work. Men like that existed in different worlds from hers. By late afternoon, villagers gathered near the central square. Fresh flowers lined the roads. Long tables displayed food and gifts prepared for the honored guests. Lila remained near the back, arranging supplies where nobody would notice her. That was exactly where she intended to stay. Then the sound of approaching horses echoed across the valley. Conversations immediately stopped. Every head turned toward the main road. A procession appeared moments later. Elegant black carriages rolled between lines of towering pines while mounted guards rode alongside them. The crowd erupted with excitement. Lila watched from a distance as the lead riders entered the square. Their uniforms bore the royal crest. Silver wolves against a midnight background. Then the central carriage stopped. Silence settled over the gathering. A tall man stepped down. Even from across the square, his presence commanded attention. Dark hair, broad shoulders, silver eyes that seemed almost impossible beneath the afternoon sun. The entire village bowed. Lila lowered her gaze as everyone else did. Yet something inside her stirred. A strange feeling she could not explain. Moments later, curiosity got the better of her. She looked up. Across the crowded square, the Alpha King's attention shifted. His silver eyes moved past nobles, elders, and pack leaders, past decorated tables and ceremonial banners, past everyone who mattered. They stopped on her. Lila froze. The world seemed to fall away. The noise disappeared. The crowd vanished. There was only that look. Calm, certain, familiar. And for one impossible second, she could have sworn she recognized those eyes from somewhere else entirely. Lila's breath caught in her throat. The Alpha King's gaze remained fixed on her for only a second, perhaps two, yet it felt impossibly longer. Then one of the elders stepped forward to greet him, and the moment vanished beneath formal introductions and ceremonial speeches. The crowd relaxed. Conversations resumed. People smiled and laughed nervously as they competed for a chance to stand closer to the royal delegation. Lila quickly lowered her eyes and returned to her work. She told herself she was imagining things. A man like Ethan Blackwood would not notice someone like her. By evening, lanterns glowed throughout the village. Music drifted across the square, while tables overflowed with food prepared for the honored guests. Lila remained near the supply tent carrying dishes and assisting wherever she was needed. As usual, nobody paid much attention to her. At first, she preferred it that way. Then she noticed something strange. Twice she looked up and found members of the royal guard watching the crowd. Not the entire crowd. Her. The realization made her uneasy. She immediately checked behind her, wondering if someone more important stood nearby. Nobody did. An hour later, while delivering fresh pitchers of water to one of the serving tables, she nearly collided with an elderly woman dressed in elegant silver robes. Lila stepped back immediately. "I am sorry." The woman smiled warmly. "There is no need to apologize." Her voice carried quiet authority. "You are Lila Morgan, correct?" Surprise flashed across Lila's face. "Yes. I thought so." The woman studied her carefully. "Interesting." Before Lila could ask what that meant, the woman simply smiled again and walked away. The encounter left her more confused than before. As darkness settled fully across the village, the celebration reached its peak. Pack leaders gathered near the central platform where Ethan Blackwood spoke with local elders. Lantern light reflected in his silver eyes while dozens of people competed for his attention. Yet despite the crowd surrounding him, there seemed to be a distance around the Alpha King that nobody could cross. He appeared calm, reserved, almost distracted. Then suddenly his head turned. Once again, his gaze found Lila. This time she felt it immediately. Her pulse skipped. Something about those eyes stirred a memory she could not quite grasp. Golden eyes beneath moonlight, dark fur shining with silver streaks. The forest, the scarf. Her heart began beating faster. No, it could not be. The thought was ridiculous, completely impossible. Yet the feeling refused to disappear. Moments later, a young servant hurried toward her. "Lila." She blinked. "What is it?" The servant looked equally confused. "The Alpha King wishes to speak with you." The tray nearly slipped from her hands. Around them, several nearby villagers overheard the words. Conversation stopped. Curious eyes turned toward her. Lila stared in disbelief. "There must be a mistake." "There is no mistake," the servant replied. "His Majesty specifically requested you by name." Silence spread through the surrounding crowd. For the first time in years, every person in Ash Creek Pack seemed to notice Lila Morgan. And suddenly, being invisible no longer felt possible. Lila felt every eye in the village following her as she crossed the square. The cheerful music seemed distant now, swallowed by the thunder of her heartbeat. She could not remember the last time anyone had spoken her name with importance. Yet somehow the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories had requested her presence personally. Villagers stepped aside as she approached the central platform. Some looked confused. Others looked suspicious. A few appeared openly jealous. Lila kept her gaze lowered, focusing on each careful step. When she finally reached the platform, she stopped several feet away and offered a respectful bow. "Your Majesty." Silence followed. Then came the sound of footsteps descending from the platform. Lila looked up. Ethan Blackwood stood before her. Up close, his presence felt even more overwhelming. Not because he appeared intimidating, but because he carried a quiet confidence that seemed completely unshakable. The silver in his eyes caught the lantern light, and suddenly that strange feeling returned stronger than ever. Recognition, familiarity, a memory she could almost touch. Ethan studied her for a moment, not the way powerful people usually looked at others. There was no judgment in his expression, no impatience, only calm attention. Then something unexpected happened. His gaze shifted toward the wool scarf tied around his wrist beneath the sleeve of his dark coat. Lila's breath stopped. The gray fabric, the small stitch corner. She knew it instantly. It was hers. The same scarf she had left beside the injured wolf in the forest. Her eyes widened. Her mind raced. Ethan noticed the realization spreading across her face. A faint smile touched his lips. "I believe this belongs to you." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. The sounds of the festival disappeared entirely. She stared at the scarf, then at Ethan, then back at the scarf again. Pieces that had made no sense suddenly began fitting together. The golden eyes, the silver markings hidden beneath black fur, the strange feeling of familiarity. "The forest," she whispered. Ethan nodded once. "The forest." Lila could barely breathe. "You were—" She stopped. The words felt impossible. Ethan finished them gently. "The wolf you helped." A collective gasp moved through nearby listeners. Several villagers had drawn closer without realizing it. Shock spread through the crowd like ripples across water. Lila heard none of it. She could only stare at Ethan. That cannot be possible. A trace of amusement appeared in his expression. Most people say the same thing. He looked toward the scarf again. You gave food to a stranger when you barely had enough for yourself. You offered shelter, water, kindness. You expected nothing in return. Lila lowered her eyes. Anyone would have done that. Ethan's voice softened. No, they would not. For a moment neither spoke. Lanterns flickered around them. The evening breeze carried the scent of pine from the distant forest. Ethan took another step forward, not as a king addressing a subject, as someone remembering a moment that mattered. I have met thousands of wolves, he said quietly. Very few have shown me the kind of heart you revealed that night. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in Lila's chest. She had spent years feeling invisible, yet somehow the one act of kindness she thought nobody would ever see had been remembered. And standing beneath the lantern light, surrounded by an entire village watching in stunned silence, she realized that her life had just changed forever. Lila stood frozen on the platform, the realization of Ethan Blackwood's words still settling like soft stones in her chest. The villagers around them murmured quietly, their whispers forming a gentle hum. But she felt detached from it all, as if time itself had slowed to a deliberate pace just for this moment. Ethan's gaze never wavered, steady and unwavering, his silver eyes reflecting the lanterns that danced in the cool evening breeze. He extended a hand, not in command, not in formality, but with the quiet assurance of someone who knew that this gesture carried weight beyond appearances. Lila hesitated for a heartbeat, then lifted her own hand to meet his, their fingers brushing lightly at first, a spark of connection igniting through the subtle contact. The moment held a clarity that cut through every doubt and fear she had ever felt about her place in the pack, about her worth and her courage. Around them, the world seemed to pause, the distant laughter and chatter of the village fading into soft background hum. The warmth of the connection spread through Lila, filling the emptiness she had carried for years. A quiet acknowledgement that kindness and courage were never unseen, never forgotten. Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile, the first sign of gentleness she had ever witnessed from a figure so powerful, and Lila realized that her entire life had shifted in the instant their hands met. The soft breeze carried the scent of pine and the distant freshness of the river, wrapping around them as if the forest itself had leaned closer to witness this moment. She took a careful breath, grounding herself in the calm certainty of the Alpha King's attention, understanding that this was the beginning of something far larger than herself, something that carried the weight of destiny and the promise of recognition she had never expected to receive. Around them, the villagers began to notice, drawing back slightly as if sensing the significance, yet no one interrupted, no one spoke, leaving the pair standing together in quiet acknowledgement. Lila's gaze remained locked on Ethan's eyes, golden memories of the forest night surfacing again, reminding her that acts of genuine kindness could ripple far beyond what one imagined. She felt her pulse steady, her heart opening to the awareness that courage, no matter how small, could shape outcomes in ways the world could never anticipate. As the last rays of sun melted behind the distant treetops, lanterns casting soft golden reflections on the platform, Ethan lowered his hand slightly, still maintaining eye contact, a silent invitation for trust, for understanding, and for the beginnings of a bond that neither time nor circumstance could easily undo. Lila understood then that everything had led to this instant. The forest, the rain, the lonely night, and the wolf in need. Every step she had taken, every choice to act with care, had brought her here, standing before a king who had seen her true nature. She drew in a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world lift slightly from her shoulders, replaced by a quiet certainty that her life, her story, and her heart were about to intertwine with something extraordinary. And for the first time in many years, she allowed herself to believe that she had a place not only in this village, but in the unfolding destiny that waited before her. The celebration continued around them, but Lila barely noticed. The lanterns, the music, The voices of hundreds of wolves all seemed distant compared to the quiet conversation unfolding between her and Ethan Blackwood. For the first time, she saw something beyond the title everyone feared and admired. Beneath the authority and composure stood the same soul she had encountered beneath the storm, exhausted and alone in the forest. Ethan released her hand slowly, yet the sense of connection remained. Nearby, several pack elders exchanged uncertain glances, clearly struggling to understand why the Alpha King had devoted so much attention to an Omega they had overlooked for years. Lila noticed their expressions and instinctively stepped back. Old habits were difficult to abandon. Attention often brought criticism. Ethan seemed to recognize her discomfort immediately. His voice remained calm. "You do not need to stand behind anyone tonight." The simple statement caught her off guard. She looked up. "I am not used to standing in front." A faint smile appeared in his eyes. "That is because others failed to see you." The words settled deep within her heart. Before she could respond, an elderly pack leader approached carefully. "Your Majesty," he began respectfully, "we have prepared accommodations for your delegation." Ethan nodded politely, but did not immediately turn away from Lila. The gesture did not go unnoticed. Murmurs spread through the crowd once again. Lila felt dozens of curious eyes following her. For years she had blended into the background. Now every glance seemed focused in her direction. It was overwhelming. Yet strangely, she did not feel alone. As the evening progressed, Ethan joined the formal gathering of leaders and advisors. Lila expected that to be the end of their interaction. Instead, she repeatedly found his attention drifting toward her across the square. Once while she carried supplies, again while she helped an elderly woman find a seat, and later while she quietly distributed blankets to children who had grown cold in the evening air. Each time, Ethan observed without interrupting, without announcing it, simply watching, understanding. The realization slowly dawned on Lila. He was not impressed by power or status. He was noticing the same things he had witnessed in the forest. Kindness, patience, care, qualities nobody else had considered valuable. Hours later, as the celebration began winding down, stars filled the sky above Ash Creek. Lila stepped away from the crowd for a moment, seeking a quiet breath of air near the edge of the square. The sounds of laughter drifted behind her while moonlight silvered the distant treetops. Footsteps approached. She turned and found Ethan standing nearby. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt comfortable, familiar. Ethan glanced toward the forest in the distance. "I returned to that clearing the next morning." Lila blinked in surprise. "You did?" He nodded. "You were already gone." A soft smile touched her lips. "I had work." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "Even then, I knew I wanted to find you again." The honesty in his voice stole her breath. Not because it sounded grand or dramatic, but because it felt completely sincere. Above them, the moon emerged from behind a passing cloud, bathing the village in pale silver light. And standing beneath that glow, Lila realized that what began as a simple act of compassion in the rain had become something neither of them could have predicted, a path quietly leading them toward a future that was only beginning to reveal itself. The following morning dawned bright and clear over Ash Creek. Sunlight poured across the village rooftops, washing away the shadows of the previous night, but nothing felt the same to Lila Morgan. Everywhere she walked, people greeted her differently. Some offered smiles. Others nodded respectfully. A few simply stared in disbelief. The change felt almost unreal. Only days earlier, she had moved through the village unnoticed. Now whispers followed her everywhere. Yet the greatest surprise came shortly after sunrise. A royal messenger arrived at her cabin carrying a sealed letter marked with the crest of the Northern Territories. Lila carefully opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a simple invitation. Ethan Blackwood requested her company for breakfast before his delegation departed. She read the words twice to make certain she understood them correctly. An hour later, she found herself seated beneath a canopy overlooking the village. Fresh coffee filled the air. Morning light reflected off silver tableware. Across from her sat the Alpha King himself, looking far more relaxed than he had the night before. For the first few minutes, conversation came awkwardly. Lila worried about saying the wrong thing. Ethan seemed to sense her nervousness. Instead of discussing politics or royal affairs, he asked about her garden, her favorite books, the stream near her cabin. the simple things that made up her life. To her surprise, he listened to every answer with genuine interest. The hours passed quickly, too quickly. Eventually, the royal guards began preparing for departure. Horses were saddled, carriages assembled. The moment neither of them wanted to acknowledge had finally arrived. Lila stood near the village entrance as the delegation prepared to leave. Villagers gathered nearby to watch. Ethan approached her one final time. The morning breeze stirred through the trees surrounding the road. Neither spoke immediately. The silence carried a strange weight. Finally, Ethan reached into his coat and withdrew a carefully folded piece of gray wool. Her scarf, perfectly cleaned and preserved. He placed it gently in her hands. "I think this belongs with you." Lila smiled softly. "You kept it." Ethan's silver eyes warmed. "Some things are worth keeping." Emotion tightened in her chest. For a moment, she struggled to find words. Ethan glanced toward the forest beyond the village. "A long time ago, someone told me that strength was measured by power." His gaze returned to hers. "You taught me something different." Lila blinked in surprise. Ethan continued. "Kindness is its own kind of strength." The words settled between them. Simple, honest, true. Then, before stepping away, he offered her something unexpected. "When you are ready, I would like you to visit the capital." Lila stared at him. Ethan smiled. No ceremonies, no obligations, just an invitation. Hope stirred quietly inside her. For the first time, the future no longer felt small or predictable. It felt open, full of possibilities she had never imagined. Moments later, the delegation began moving. Carriages rolled forward. Riders followed. The road stretched toward the horizon beneath a sky of endless blue. Ethan paused once before disappearing into the distance. Their eyes met one final time. Then he was gone. Lila remained standing beneath the morning sun, her scarf held close to her heart. Around her, the village continued its ordinary rhythm. Yet she knew something extraordinary had happened. Not because a king had noticed her, not because her life had changed, but because one simple act of kindness, given freely with no expectation of reward, had traveled farther than she ever imagined. And somewhere beyond the distant hills, a king rode toward home carrying the memory of an Omega who reminded him that the gentlest hearts often possess the greatest strength of all.